Hello to all of you from around the world. I want to welcome you back to another great edition of Soulivity Today, broadcasting live from our studios right here in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., and on KMET 1490 AM radio in Southern California. I am so glad you're here. My name is Brian Westley Johnson, and I hope you're ready for an amazing show today. I'm joined today by Sheila Applegate, host of Consciously Awesome Living. Hello to you, Sheila.
Hello. Good to be here.
Yesterday we had a rebroadcast of your show on Two Feathers, and I always try to catch that one because it's so good.
You know
Now,
what?
how long? Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say you didn't realize when you rebroadcasted that one, but Two Feathers is a soul of someone I knew on Earth, and yesterday was his birthday. Isn't that
What?
wild? Yeah.
Wow. So I guess that's why I was led to watch it. Watch, some of it yesterday. And that is, wow. Guys, you guys just don't understand how bizarre that is, because we rebroadcast a lot of different shows. And the fact that we were able to rebroadcast that show on that day, which happened to be your soul guide's birthday, is just kismet. So I love
Right.
it. I love it. I love
Yes.
it. I love it. I love it. So yeah, it was really, really good. I highly recommend people go and watch that. If you ever wondered about having a spirit guide and the importance of that, go check out that show. Because that was really, really good. So thanks for doing that, Sheila.
Thank you.
We have today's show, it's one of those shows that I think when we were putting it together, Sheila, that I think it's one of those situations where it's like, okay, this show is like important. And I mean, they're all important, but this one's like really important. And it's kind of interesting, the dynamic that when we're in the moment, it doesn't matter whether what we're talking about happened in the past or not. It becomes relevant in this present time. And so that's in part what kind of happened with this show. So, as I said before, the show today is one that's really important. And I'm glad that we put it together. And, we're going to be talking about forgiveness, racism, bias, and microaggressions today, which is something that is, I think, Sheila, we talk about it, a lot of times about what's happening in the news and stuff like that. And we've talked about it on this show before. But I thought that, based upon, some of the things that happened over the last week, that was like, oh, well, I guess it's time for us to talk about it again. And so just to give everyone a backstory about how this show came together, Sheila, you and I talked about this, but maybe a few days ago, maybe last week, I was doing some surfing on social media. We do this all the time to kind of find out what's happening in our world, right? Specifically what's happening on social media. And so I came across a tweet on Twitter which featured a clip from the Sky News show. This show was called The Pledge. And this show, typically it's like a roundtable. It has 4 noted journalists, mostly British, and they discuss things that are happening. And on this particular show, they were discussing the BBC sacking or firing Danny Baker, who's a noted comedian and journalist, commentator, I should say, not journalist, saying that he showed a serious error in judgment over his tweet about the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. At this time, it was Harry and Meghan and their newborn baby. So this story was happening in 2019. Now, the tweet, which he later deleted, but had been, circulated on social media, it showed an image of a couple holding hands with a chimpanzee dressed in clothes with the caption, "Royal baby leaves hospital." I'm sure this was covered on national news, and we aren't going to be showing the tweet for obvious reasons. But in the show itself, there was another thing that happened outside of the discussion of the tweet itself. And we'll show the clip in a second. But again, what's interesting is that, Sheila, the clip is 4 years old, and there was a renewed discussion, specifically on Black Twitter, go Black Twitter, about the treatment of the noted author, poet, and journalist Afua Hirsch, which I love, during the show. So let's watch this clip, and then we'll talk a little bit more after it.
Is being stupid a crime? Is being, he was in, the tweet was investigated by the police. What is it?
More so, can you be something, a sexist, a racist, a homophobe, if you weren't intending the meaning of those words when you said something that has the consequence of being racist, sexist, or homophobic? No, because intent matters.
I think it does matter,
Now,
absolutely.
Because also, Afua, again, I understand the history of this slur, but we've got to, look, I suffer from racism as well. We've got to distinguish between intended racism and accidental racism. Yeah. Otherwise, we don't give people the chance to redeem themselves. If everything is racist, whether you intended it or not, then there's no forgiveness. There's no redemption, and there's no apology.
The concept of forgiveness.
There's no apology. Why apologize if you're guilty anyway? Yeah. Then that's it. You can't change it. It's...
Do you not accept that? I mean, you're sitting back and I get you're upset.
I'm ready to speak. I haven't had a chance to come in. In response to your question, Carol, my issue is that everybody makes the person who does the racist thing the victim. So you're asking, is it right that he was sacked? Greg's saying he's a nice guy, he's going to lose his job. How is he the victim in this scenario? This is a pregnant woman who had to arrange new levels of protection because of the amount of racist abuse she was receiving, which escalated when she announced she was pregnant. She's always had racist abuse, but when she announced her pregnancy, it multiplied because there is so much toxic racism in our society.
That's not Danny Baker's fault.
That's not Danny Baker's fault, but what is Danny Baker's fault is that he did something which was so offensive that when I first saw it, I actually thought it was a prank. I just thought nobody who the BBC gives a platform could be stupid enough to say this and not intend it to be racist, because it is one of, and we could talk about unintended racism or microaggressions, this is none of those. This is the most blatant, clear-cut example of racism. It's that generations of people have recognised this as an overtly racist trope. Within people's lifetimes, black people were still being compared to monkeys and dehumanised regularly.
So the sacking is right,
So I'm not interested in him. I'm not interested in him or what happens to him. By the way, he's already done a show which was more successful than his previous shows since he's been sacked. So if you're worried about his career, then I suspect
no one's worried about his career per se.
I'm not interested in him.
Talking.
I'm worried about the millions of black people who regularly live with this kind of abuse and then have to be in spaces like this where everybody denies it's a problem. That is something that I could not feel more strongly about, and I'm living it right now in this conversation. It's not good enough.
Woo. Yeah. And so when Afua said what she said at the end, where she said, "I'm living it right now," I'll ask you first, Sheila, what kind of went through your mind and heart when you heard those words?
So, as you know, I watched the whole clip. So I saw her throughout this discussion, and my stomach was hurting. I could identify with her just from being a woman who doesn't think like the rest of the world.
Right.
I could put myself in her position, even as a white woman, but knowing that it was so much worse for her. And so there's a lot of compassion. And then, to be honest, I was proud when she said it. Like, I mean, it's disgusting that the people still weren't listening to her when she said it. And yet she did a beautiful job of saying it and claiming the truth and seeing it. Part of me said, oh, I want to show this clip to everyone who doesn't understand. And then I'm like, yeah, but would they understand? I don't even know if it would help,
Right. Thanks for that. Because again, this is a 2-minute clip that we showed, and we showed the 2-minute clip because that was what other people were seeing on social media. But we have the link to the whole show. Please go watch it, or most of the show. It puts it more in context. I'm with you on this one, Sheila, where it was obvious that they weren't listening to what she had to say. They weren't that the conversation never elevated above should Danny Baker be sacked or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that well, he apologized for it, and so he didn't, and that he says he didn't really mean it that way, and so everybody should be okay. And then it was like, okay, let's move on, right? Alfeo was basically trying to elevate it and say, listen, it's not about that. Listen, I don't care about him being sacked or not. What I care about is what I care about is the ability for someone to use that kind of racist trope, right? And that we're not all outraged about the fact that that trope was even being used. Doesn't matter if it was intentional or not, right? What matters is that the trope was used, and that we're not discussing about, wow, I wonder how Megan is feeling about today, right? What's Danny doing? Did Danny go through a teachable moment? What was his response to all this? Was it, oh, I didn't mean to do it? Or is it, or what would be more appropriate is him saying, listen, I understand what I did is wrong. I understand that BBC is going to do what they're going to have to do, because I'm taking responsibility for my actions, right?
Right.
And that I will endeavor to do better. I will endeavor to learn more about what is considered to be racist to those other groups that have been marginalized. Because we'll show the article that her response in terms of an opinion that she wrote later. But it just seemed like in that moment, the discussion turned back around where it's like the people who are being subjugated to these acts, to these behaviors, may it be blatant racism, bias, or microaggressions, which are in fact racism, right? That the responsibility for that becomes the people who are being affected by it, not the people who are actually doing the behavior, right?
Right.
I was blown. Again, all this happened 4 years ago. I didn't even know that they had this show on it. I knew about the tweet, and I knew about the sanding of Danny Baker, but I didn't know that Sky News had a discussion about it because watch the Sky News over here a lot. But so I'm glad that it came back around. You had a specific story that's in the realm of this that you just experienced as well. Can you tell people about that?
Yeah. It's interesting, Brian, we talked about you airing the show in that synchronistic moment, but this is another one because we both started talking yesterday and I was about to say, I have a topic, and then you brought this topic up and it's the same topic.
It's so funny. I love it though.
Right. So I live in a small town in New York we're small. We have one high school that covers both of the middle school and high school, and my child graduated with 40 people in their class. Like, this is a small town, and in that town, in the district, includes the Onondaga Nation, which is Haudenosaunee or Iroquois. So we're talking Native American.
Right.
And over the last few weeks, what's been happening is that a few weeks ago, and now it has, from what I've heard, it has been investigated and concluded that this did happen, because it was word of mouth at first, right? Because it wasn't on camera, But a teacher asked an Onondaga student to sit up straight like you would in boarding school. And I know that because of the way our education system works here, we don't have a lot of information about history. So for anyone out there who doesn't understand the impact of it, the boarding schools is part of the United States genocide against the indigenous people of this land. And so they were taking the children away from the families and beating the culture out of them.
Right.
And they're pulling up graves right here in this area. They have been pulling up graves out of Canada. So it was Canada
Wow.
too. And they're finding the graves in the same yards as the school. In the backyard of the schools, there are graves of children who had never been found until recently. There's no way that a teacher couldn't know that. And if a teacher didn't know that, and also that teacher worked at the Onondaga Nation School. So there is an elementary school just for the children in the territory. But it's a microaggression in a sense because so it was the aunt of the girl that had that experience who brought it up into the public. And so they spoke up, and all of this is still going on because I don't know what the result is. But I also talked to people who were friends with him and said, well, he's not prejudiced. So I'm devastated. Like, he doesn't appear to be prejudiced. And this is someone from this, but if that happened, it's not okay. So I don't know what the result is going to be, but it's not okay. It couldn't really be an accident, but even if it was, it's not okay.
Yeah, and that's and that in of itself, I mean, both stories have this correlation, right? Both they're based in racist history, right? Which is fact, right? I just want to remind people that why is it that when people talk about boarding school, for me, it's, I know even before I knew the history, boarding school had always had a negative connotation to it, right? So why is that? Why did it have a negative connotation to it? And Sheila, you just told why, right? So there's this history that's there. And then you have all these years that have passed, and now today it's like, I mean, I've heard, white people say, just run around like a little monkey, right? To little small children, right?
Right.
And it being cute, right? That didn't come about because that parents always thought about their children like they're little monkeys having fun. That came about because it's always been a racist trope, and that plantation owners would look at young Black children, right, playing around, and they would call them little monkeys, and that would be their cute term for it. And then it became more of this colloquialism that is just broadly amongst Americans.
Right.
It still doesn't mean that it's not a racist trope and that it doesn't affect Black people that way. Just like saying to a First Nation child, "Oh, sit up straight like you're in boarding school." Right. Wow. I think we need to take a break, right?
Sounds like a good idea.
Why don't we take a break? We got more to talk about. Would love feedback from any of you out there. It can either be during our live stream or even after. Just post to our comments or our chat, and we'll get you in on this conversation. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in about 2 minutes.
6 years ago, when I started Soulivity, my vision was to support everyone in improving their life. through the discovery of their passion and purpose, so they can become the best version of themselves, to battle fear and ignorance, and create a better world today. Get inspired to live your passion and purpose. Visit soulivity.com now.
Do you see me kneeling on this dual roller called Parasetter? It's actually comfortable because of this channel and the softness of the special foam. It feels like my kneecaps are being massaged. When I lie down, my spine is housed in this channel, while the convex rollers massage my muscles. They let go and lengthen. There's a traction effect from my head on the headrest and my mid-back from the rib wrap, which hugs me. When I start the breathing sequence, I feel calm because my cortisol levels are dropping. Lower cortisol means bye-bye constant hunger. Parasetter is 40 inches long and much more comfortable than old-style rollers, but it weighs only 10 ounces. Parasetter, just like Pilates was, is no longer an insider secret. Do yourself a favor. Reset your parasympathetic nervous system. Defeat stress. Lying, sitting, kneeling, or standing. This unique patented roller helps everyone.
Microaggressions are not solely based on a person's ethnicity, but it can also relate to someone's gender, sexual orientation, religion, disability, neurodiversity, regional, and any aspect of diversity or difference that can make the person experiencing the microaggression uncomfortable. If we break up the meaning of microaggressions, it can be characterized into 3 subheadings according to intensity. The first is microinvalidations, then microinsults, and then microassaults. Microinvalidations are comments and behaviors that deny the experiences of a marginalized group member. For example, when a black woman gets upset at a white colleague touching her hair and her white colleague tells her, "Don't be so oversensitive," or "Don't be petty," these microinvalidations cause harm and diminish a person's experience of a microaggression. Microinsults are more subtle than microassaults, but nevertheless have harmful effects on marginalized group members. For example, a microinsult could involve a comment implying that a woman received a job due to their positive discrimination. Microassaults are the most apparent microaggressions. With microassaults, the person committing the microaggression acted intentionally and knew that their behavior might be hurtful. For example, using a derogatory term to a person of color could be a microassault. Because microaggressions are so subtle, it can be painful when nobody acknowledges your pain. If you find yourself or your colleague committing a microaggression, it's important to speak up or support the person who's experiencing the microaggression. Each decision or action can have a powerful ripple effect in changing or not changing the future. Every decision to not speak up or act means the cycle of inequality continues. When addressing the microaggression, it may be best to consider the context, when and where to address the offender. Adjust the response and tone as warranted. Think about the relationship to the offender. Be sure to criticize the microaggression and not the microaggressor.
Woo! And we're back with more of Soulivity Today. We're talking about society's current attempts to reconcile instances of racism, bias, and microaggressions. And back with us is Soulivity co-host Sheila Applegate. I love that clip because it really encapsulates like both of those stories, right? Especially Afua's moment where she's talking about a micro assault and then that becomes a microaggression against her in the conversation. Right. It's like I could only imagine how she was feeling and what her thoughts were after that. What makes this so nasty, Sheila? I mean, you know, what makes this so difficult where, like in the video is saying, listen, we can talk about this and we can take the microaggressor out of the picture, right? And talk about the aggression. So this now becomes a teachable moment so that both forgiveness can be brought out, but also atonement, right? Because we talk about this forgive a lot of times, but we don't talk about atonement. And that's what this video is talking about. Like, how do you atone? How do you get into atoning for, even if it was unintentional, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Right?
Right. Yeah. What I was thinking about is I think that sometimes when people are defending something like this, it's because they are afraid, even though they know their intentions are good, they are afraid that they will make a mistake someday and hurt someone. For me, that would be it. Like, I am afraid that I'm going to inadvertently say something that hurts someone. So I thought about that, and I thought, well, the answer to that, of course, is education, which we can go in more about in a minute, but the atonement is what you're saying. And I really thought that through. Now, I've been an entrepreneur, so I haven't been in a position where I could be fired in a very long time by, by an employer, but by a client, I suppose.
Right.
But I thought, I can't see myself doing, if I somehow said something that I didn't intend to, I can't see myself not being like, yeah, that was effed up, and I don't know why I did it. I am so sorry. I will quit today,
Right.
like, because I
Right.
shouldn't be in this situation, and I will take the penalty
Right.
because there's no other way to. There's just, unless you honor it and say, all right, I messed up. There has to be consequences, and I'm going to try to do better. I don't see how there's any other alternative to that, I
Right.
guess.
And two thoughts on this. One is, and I'll go do the second thought first, and then the first thought second, which is kind of funny. If you let's take Danny Baker, for instance, right? If all things being equal, isn't it like more likely that, listen, if you're doing actions at work and you're conscious of them, and you're conscious of those actions that may get you fired, are you more likely than not to do those actions?
Yeah.
Right?
Right. Yeah.
So what made him think that posting a picture, let's say the picture wasn't racist, but was trying to be funny. What makes it okay that any child would be compared to an animal like that?
Right. Right.
And
It's
wouldn't
not.
you think, right, exactly. And wouldn't you think before you click tweet or post, something in your mind would say, I wonder how many people this might offend that watch or listen to the company that I work for, right?
Right.
And so maybe I shouldn't do this, right?
Right.
That didn't happen. That
Right.
didn't happen, right? And so the other thought was this. I'm a parent, you're a parent, there's plenty of parents out here. How would you feel if you're the parent and that's your child, and you're talking about your child that way? And your child is completely broken and hurt by it.
Right.
But you say, well, I didn't really mean it, right? I didn't really mean to do that. And so just forgive me. Or would you go, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Why did that hurt you so much? I want to understand so that I will never do that again. So think about it that way, right?
Right.
And think about it that way, even if it's just a person. Like like I almost like want to like bring somebody that you really love and care for into the equation and have them replace the person that you're having that aggression with, and then see if you would act the same way.
Right.
More
Because
than
it's an
likely you
actual
wouldn't,
person. Right.
because you're
Right.
not seeing that person as a person. And that's what I think was happening in that whole discussion, like with Althea, that was happening with the teacher, with the student, that they're not completely seeing that person, right? And again, again, it doesn't matter whether or not people intended it or not intended it. It doesn't matter, because the person who is afflicted by it is still wounded and pain, and it's painful for them. And it's not only painful for them, it brings back the generations before them that had to go through the similar things, and probably even worse things.
Right.
So,
Right.
wow. Yeah, I mean, that's the part that kind of gets me sometimes, where it's like, um, we don't really dig deep into what do we do afterwards, right? After it happens, it's like everybody wants to just move to forgiveness and forgetting, and it's like, no, we as the video was kind of saying, you don't deal with the underlying racism, and you don't dispel it. That's not dispelling it. It's like pushing it to the side as it gets larger and larger and larger, and it's this pink elephant in the room.
Right.
Any other thoughts about this? I can hear kind of in your voice. It's kind of like there's something else you want to say.
Well, I guess I'm going back to education, which is probably a whole nother topic to move
Oh,
into. But in the clip that I think it wasn't shown with what we said today, but the idea that he said he didn't realize what he was doing, and of course, if he realized what he was doing, he wouldn't have done it. But how is a television show not? We need education. We need
yes,
education. This is why we need our true history in the school systems as we raise
yes,
our kids. This is
yes,
why we have to teach about the transgressions of the people who came before us, because if
yes.
we don't know them, we can't fix them. And
Right.
so there's no excuse to say, so one of the things I was so impressed with, because here in this situation in my community, the oppressed had to be the strong ones again. And
Right.
they have family members who were in boarding schools. They've been
Yes.
through it, yet they came up and they did it. From my perspective, as I sat from this side, I saw them do it with such dignity, and they reflected truth. They called for and even offered people who could teach the school system, teach the facility,
Right.
teach the teachers, teach the faculty to do better, to change this. And so they're
Right.
not calling just for, they aren't calling about, it's not about whether he gets fired or not, although I'm sure they hope he does, but it's like all the school take responsible to make this better,
Ye-
you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
why the television networks didn't say that. Like, okay, we need to teach ourselves more.
Right.
We let this
Right.
happen on our clock. It's all of our problem. That's where
Absolutely.
I was.
And I think that is why, and we're kind of talking about the difficulties in all this, and trying to create some solutions. And I think that's why it's so nasty and difficult, because I think people are afraid of opening up that box and really looking at the good, the bad, and the real ugly of our history around the world of
Right.
subjugating different people, right? And that, the ongoing solution, if you can even call that, is to try to just categorize racism in a way where it's like, well, this racism is really bad, but this racism is okay, right?
Right.
Instead of, racism is racism, and that it doesn't matter whether or not it's intentional or not. The the bottom line is that you still have to deal with it, right?
Mhm.
In a forward progressive way. But the degrees of how that happened are different. So if a person kills somebody because of racism, that's one difference where that person goes to jail. It's different
Right.
than a person who does a racist trope where they get fired. But beyond that, you still talk about it. You
Right.
still talk about it, right? And you do history, right? It's why, like I was thinking about why the current bans on talking about history in our school districts here in America are it's so heinous, because again,
Right.
it's like another level of trying to divide people and move them into their own separate corners, and letting some forms of racism and all this stuff be okay, right? And for
Mhm.
this continued, like, oh well, he didn't intend to be racist, letting that kind of thought process and psychology keep existing when we know that it's tearing us apart, right? Because people
Right.
know that. We know this.
Right.
We
Right.
know this. Why don't we take another quick break? And when we come back, I want to kind of tell people about what Alfua Hirsch did in response to that whole show and how her feelings were, and what she's trying to tell us around how to move forward. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes. Soulivity Today is brought to you by Assume control over your weight and broader health with the 80 Bites program by Physical Mind Institute.
For 50 years, we've been told, load up your plate with veggies. Load them up. Because all this spinach, look at it, all the spinach is only 100 calories. But avoid fat, because a tiny sliver of butter is also 100 calories. So spinach is good, butter is bad, right? But not today. Now we're told, put butter on everything, even in your coffee. Why? Because fat doesn't spike insulin, as carbs do. And stretching the stomach with all those veggies unbalances our digestive hormones. So eat healthy today means fat, fasting, stomach control, right here's the stomach. Forget calories. Hormones rule, and 80 Bites is the solution.
And we're back with more of Soulivity Today. We're talking about forgiveness, racism, bias, and microaggressions today. And we've got Soulivity co-host Sheila Applegate with me as well. Sheila, one of the things that I really kind of want to talk about is, again, this show is all about empowerment. It's about talking about difficult subjects, but turning that on its head and trying to move into, well, how can we utilize this information in our own lives to kind of move us forward? And there is this great article, and again, these are things that I wish that the media would put forth a little bit more, because these are all, like you were saying, like education is part of this, and I think one of the roles of the media is to educate. There's this great article that Alfua Hirsch wrote in the wake of that video that we showed earlier about Sky News, where the headline says it all. Expecting me to explain racism is exploitative. That's not my job.
Right.
And there's an excerpt from this I'm going to read really quickly, and then we can get into our discussion. She says, I wish I could say that since I'm resilient, I am. That since I am comfortable as a former barrister, with adversarial conversations I am, that since I have done the work as an author to equip myself to engage in discourse about racism and identity, I have, that encounters like this therefore do not affect me deeply, but they do. The reality is that while the other panelists walked away, another job done, their place in the world or sense of their own humanity unscathed, and the program production team congratulated me on a strong performance, I was not performing. I was living another traumatic experience, another traumatic encounter with the denial of my experience. I was carrying a burden for all people of color who have to carry out their professional duties while being dehumanized.
Mm-hmm.
And so you got to ask yourself, if you were sitting there and that was your wife in that scene, or your husband in that scene, would you have taken the same approach in that moment?
To me, like, that's a good question, and yet I don't even it doesn't matter who's sitting in there. Like, how I was blown away. I was blown away in watching the full clip on how they're her colleagues. Like,
Yeah.
they work with her. How,
Yeah.
or anyone, how does anyone sit in a situation and look at somebody's face who is experiencing that much pain,
Right.
knowing, how do you not stop and listen? It just, I know that that's what we're talking about. People do that, but I don't even understand how people can be that closed off from reality. I'm sorry. Didn't mean to, like.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's like, you know, one dude is like, well, I've been subject to racism too. Like, that matters to her experience, right? Another person is like focused purely on the right or wrong of Danny Baker being sacked and making
Right.
and basically qualifying what had happened to Meghan Markle, right? There was no discussion of what happened to her in that instance by seeing this in the national news, right? Nobody thought,
Right.
nobody
Or the
said,
child who will grow up and that clip
exactly.
will still be out there. And that's a human being. You know?
So, you know, I just bring this up because we're trying to kind of move into, you know, how do we deal with this? And you know, I think what we're saying now is you got to build the capacity of compassion in your heart so that you can become more aware of what's happening with the other person. The video that we just showed before around microaggressions really talks about this, that you have to allow yourself to be placed in the position of the person who is being the subject of the aggression, may it be purely hateful racism in the form of something overt or something as a microaggression or something that is unintended, still racist, but still affects that person. You have to put yourself in that person's shoes and what they're feeling, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sheila, you talked about education, right? Saying to a student that you sit up like you're in a boarding school is racist. It's racist and hurtful, especially when you know your history. You just said it before, right? Where boarding schools were part of the genocide against First Nation people, Native Americans in our country.
Right.
You know, I mean, and it's genocide, people. This is just not, oh, we just, killed off a few Indians. there are whole tribes that are gone.
Right. And it's generational, like everything else, because then a whole group of people, even that survived, had no parenting, had abuse, and then they went out to parent, and they went out to parent, and those are the children that were sitting in that room.
Right.
You know?
Right. So, you
I keep
know,
moving it back to the yuck, and you keep you're doing a great job, Brian. I'm sorry I put you in that position.
well, it's hard because I don't want, listen, this is those instances where in growth, we're supposed to feel a certain way, right? The
Right.
feeling is what moves us, right? And
Right.
so the fact that something that happened 4 years ago
Mhm.
that we really didn't have a discussion about this piece of it, and that it came back again, and then social media caught on fire, specifically in Black Twitter, about this part, or in your neck of the woods with a student being told, sit up like you're in a boarding school, and that kind of thing. It's like we're supposed to feel a certain way about that. That
Right.
is
We do
good
need to
news.
feel.
Right.
Right. The other thing I had as a tip, as you were so good at giving tips, I think the willing to change your mind, the listening without an agenda. There was the one guy who was most vocal. I didn't remember the guys' names in this, but he said, I didn't know how I felt. I didn't know what I thought about this. And I just finally made my decision, yesterday or whatever. And I'm like, well, why? Why did you have to make a decision yesterday? Is that the format of the show? Is it like you have to come in and you hold that because this is a debate?
Right.
Or can you say, oh, yesterday I was feeling this after going back and forth, and now I'm listening to new information, so I'm willing to change.
Right.
Like we can be fluid.
Yeah, I love that because, again, we're talking about the fact that these people aren't the subject of the aggression a lot of times,
Mhm.
right? And that in those instances, maybe, especially as, we're in, media and that kind of thing, maybe the appropriate thing is just be with it, then come in and then admit, listen, we're going to talk about this today, but I really, 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 really want to take in whatever information people are saying. I can tell you how I'm feeling about this, what my
Mhm.
thoughts may be about it, but I'm not here to have final decisions about anything. I'm here to discuss and really talk about, okay, Danny Baker got sacked because of this. And how did that affect our society? How did that affect Meghan Markle? How did that affect, I feel like, other people of color that are subject to this, right?
Mhm.
That's the discussion,
Right.
right?
Right. And then we look at the programming again because they set this up by
Right.
saying, let's talk
Exactly.
about whether he should be fired rather than let's talk about what happened and how we can do
Absolutely.
better.
Absolutely. Wow. Well, great discussion today. I'm so happy that we did this. Why don't we get to, while we've got some time here, why don't we get to some shameless plugs since we're running out of time today? Sheila, you and Zach have something that's amazing coming up on the 21st. Can you talk a little bit about fractal illumination?
Yes, we're having a fractal illumination gathering, which is a energetic day where you really just receive the gift of this energy in a fun, community-centered circle. And it really, one of the practical things that it does is it resets our nervous system. And I think that, as we're
Oh,
talking about this today, there's so much anxiety in the world right now because the world is in such a big shift and transformation that it's running havoc on our bodies. And this will help your body to harmonize, your mind to harmonize with all of this. So you feel a little more centered and stronger to deal with the things that are happening in our world.
Wow. Fantastic. And I'm so glad you guys are doing this. I mean, it is definitely worthwhile. So thank you for that. Want to remind everybody too that coming up next week is another Joy Keepers Cafe with Sheila doing the meditation. It's on Wednesday, October 25th at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific time, 4 p.m. in London, and 5 p.m. in Copenhagen. So reserve your seat by going to joykeepers.org/cafe. It is always a hootin' good time. The meditation portion is always recorded with Sheila, and then there's an open discussion afterwards. It's not recorded. That's only available if you go to the live session. So reserve your seat today, and we'll see you next week at 11 o'clock. Woo woo! Can't wait for that. Also want to just remind everybody, go to soulivity.com for more information about our show and everything else that's happening. Some great contents there, and hope to see you there soon. So Sheila, thanks again for being here. Thanks for this conversation. This was
Microaggressions are not solely based on a person.
Oops.
Thank you.
Oops. Yeah, it's a really powerful
was.
conversation today. Yeah. And go check out those videos, everybody, and learn more about everything that's there. Listen, we are running out of time, and so I'm going to say goodbye to everybody. Thanks for being here. This is how we do it Monday through Fridays at 8 a.m. Eastern, and also at 8 o'clock Pacific time on KMET 1490 AM radio. Until next time, keep having these kind of conversations with passion, purpose, and create your high quality life today. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.
This work is subject to copyright owned by Affinity Global LLC. Any reproduction or republication of all or part of this is expressly prohibited unless Affinity Global LLC has explicitly granted